She only meant to comfort the crying boy seated at the table. But the moment her hand brushed his cheek, the room went still. Every laugh, every whisper gone. The Don's gaze lifted, cold, unreadable, commanding. In a voice that made even his men freeze, he said, "Wait. Don't leave yet." From that night on, she wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the one woman the Mafia boss could never let go. The story doesn't end here. Subscribe to Mafia Soul to see what happened next, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Every view keeps these stories alive. The February wind was merciless that night, slicing through the thin fabric of Isabella Romano's coat as she hurried down West 54th Street. Her breath puffed in small clouds, hands tucked under her arms as she dashed toward Il Sereno, the upscale Italian restaurant that paid her barely enough to keep her family alive back home in Calabria. She slipped through the back door, the warmth and smell of roasted garlic and truffle oil wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. Her fingers were numb, her hair slightly damp from the sleet. "Isabella, Dio mio, you're late again." Marco, the floor manager, barked from behind the espresso counter. His usually calm face was tight with nerves. "Private table tonight. Table 12. You're serving them." Her stomach dropped. "That's Francesca's section," she said, fumbling to tie her black apron. She called out sick. Marco lowered his voice, glancing toward the kitchen door. "Listen carefully. You'll be serving him tonight." "Him?" Marco's gaze flicked to the front of the restaurant. Don Adriano Vitale. The name hit her like a chill. Everyone at Il Sereno knew it. The man behind half the city's high-end imports, construction firms, and whispers that never made it into print. Some said he was the reason no one dared open a competing restaurant within 10 blocks. Others said he was the kind of man you didn't cross twice. Isabella swallowed. "Why me?" "Because you're polite, quiet, and invisible," Marco hissed. "And tonight, that's exactly what I need you to be." She took a steadying breath, checked her reflection in the polished steel of the kitchen door. Pale skin, tired eyes, a loose curl escaping her bun. Invisible. She could do that. She had been doing it her entire life. Pushing through the swinging doors, she stepped into the glowing dining room. The chandeliers caught the gold in the crystal glasses, laughter hummed from the wealthy tables, and her soft-soled shoes whispered across the polished floor. The private section of Il Sereno was separated by frosted glass panels etched with vines and cherubs, elegance disguising danger. Behind those panels, the air changed. The laughter dulled, replaced by the low murmur of power. Her pulse quickened as she reached for the handle of the private room door. Inside sat 6 men in tailored suits, their voices carrying the weight of old money and older bloodlines. The scent of cigars hung thick in the air. But it wasn't their gazes that held her still. It was the boy beside them. He couldn't have been more than 6. Curly dark hair, small hands clutching a linen napkin, eyes red from crying. A plate of untouched pasta sat in front of him. He looked heartbreakingly out of place. One of the men said something in Italian, making the others laugh. The boy flinched. Isabella's heart twisted. Instinct overtook reason. She knelt beside him, her voice soft. "Hi, Piccolo," she whispered. "Va tutto bene?" He blinked up at her, uncertain, as if kindness were something he hadn't seen in a while. His lip trembled. "Mama used to say that." The table went silent. From the head of the table, a deep, deliberate voice cut through the air. "Is there a problem, Signorina?" Her head snapped up, and she met him. Don Adriano Vitale. Dark hair, slicked back neatly, a single silver streak catching the light. His jaw was strong, his suit impeccably cut, his eyes the color of polished obsidian. Unblinking, analytical, almost curious. "No, signore," Isabella stammered, standing quickly. He dropped his napkin." Adriano's gaze flicked to his son, then back to her. "I see." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but not disapproval either. Something measured. "Continue, then." Isabella's pulse thundered in her ears. She finished her duties quickly, avoiding eye contact, keeping her breathing steady. Where her shift ended, she exhaled in relief, slipped out of her apron, and reached for her coat. But before she could reach the exit, a voice, smooth, deep, unmistakable, called from behind her. "Miss Romano, wait. Don't leave yet." She froze. That was the night everything changed. The night a single act of compassion pulled her into the orbit of a man whose world could destroy her or save her. The restaurant was nearly silent after midnight, the kind of silence that only existed when money and power had finished eating and left the ghost behind. Chairs were turned upside down on tables, the kitchen lights dimmed, and the air still smelled faintly of truffle and expensive wine. Isabella wiped her hands on her apron, ready to clock out, when Marco appeared in the doorway, pale and tense. "Miss Romano," he said quietly, eyes darting toward the private dining room. "Mr. Vitale would like a word." Her breath caught. "At this hour?" He gave a nervous nod. "You don't keep a man like him waiting." Her feet felt heavy as she crossed the empty dining room. The golden lights glowed low, the only sound the soft click of her shoes against the floor. The door to the private room was half open, a line of warm light spilling across the dark tiles. Adriano Vitale sat alone now, jacket draped over his chair, sleeves rolled to his forearms. The boy, Leonardo, slept curled on a velvet bench beside him, his small face peaceful for the first time that night. Adriano looked up as she entered, calm, unreadable, like a man who had already made a decision. "Sit," he said simply. Isabella hesitated before lowering herself into the chair opposite him. "I owe you my thanks," he said, voice low. "My son rarely allows anyone near him. Tonight was the first time he's responded." His gaze drifted briefly to the sleeping child. Since his mother's passing, he hasn't spoken a word. Doctors call it selective mutism. I call it grief. The admission carried weight, not just sadness, but something darker underneath it, something he didn't often expose. "I didn't mean to intrude," Isabella said softly. "I just couldn't ignore him." Adriano's eyes returned to her. "You didn't intrude. You reminded him of kindness. That is not something easily found in my world." He leaned back slightly, assessing her with that same measured precision she'd seen earlier. "I want you to come work for me," he said, "as Leonardo's caretaker. Live in position. You'll be well compensated." Her pulse quickened. "Work for you?" He nodded once. "He trusts you. I can't explain it, but you calm him, and my son needs calm." The words hung between them, heavy and impossible. Isabella's first instinct was to refuse. No amount of money could justify stepping into the orbit of a man like this. Yet the thought of her father's growing medical bills, of her sister's overdue tuition, pressed hard against her chest. "I don't know if I'm qualified," she murmured. "I don't care about qualifications," Adriano said. "I care about results. You helped him tonight. That is enough." He slid a small envelope across the table, crisp, white, embossed with a gold crest. "Consider this in advance. If you agree, a car will collect you tomorrow morning." Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. He stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Good night, Miss Romano." Outside, the night air bit at her skin as she stepped into the street. She clutched the envelope, feeling the faint outline of cash inside, and for the first time in months, the weight of her choices pressed harder than the cold. By dawn, her decision was made. The car rolled through iron gates taller than most city buildings, their black steel swirling with gold vines and a crest carved into the center, Vittle. Beyond it stretched a long, tree-lined drive that curved toward a house, so vast it felt like something lifted out of a dream, and not entirely a good one. The Vitale villa was all marble and silence, its windows tall and shuttered, its gardens manicured with military precision. The Hudson shimmered faintly behind it, a silver ribbon cutting through the mist. Two men in black coats stood at the entrance, their expressions as fixed as statues. One opened the car door for her without a word. "Welcome, Signorina Romano," he said, voice devoid of warmth. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old smoke. A grand staircase swept upward like a spine of carved stone, and chandeliers gleamed overhead, throwing fractured light across portraits of men whose eyes seemed to follow her. She wondered how many generations of vitals had stared down from those walls, and how much blood had been shed to keep their fortunes shining. A woman in her 50s appeared from a side corridor, her posture strict but her eyes kind. "I'm Signora Conti, the housekeeper," she said, taking Isabella's coat. "We keep to order here. Breakfast is at 8, dinner at 7. The boy's room is down the East Hall. Yours is beside his." "The boy, Leonardo," Isabella said, voice soft. "Yes." A brief pause, then quieter. "Be patient with him. He's sensitive." Signora Conti's gaze flickered toward a tall painting on the stair landing. A woman with dark hair and eyes like Leonardo's, captured mid-smile. The late Signora Vitale. Flowers, fresh lilies, stood beneath the frame. "Does he ever talk about her?" Isabella asked. "Never," the housekeeper murmured. "And neither does his father." The next days passed in slow rhythm. Leonardo was shy at first, hiding behind doors and refusing meals unless she sat beside him. But he listened. When Isabella read aloud in Italian, he'd inch closer, his small hands clutching his toy car. By the third evening, he drew her a picture, a crooked sun over a house, and left it folded on her nightstand. The villa itself felt alive, its quiet full of secrets. At night, she'd hear muted voices through the walls, low male tones and the clink of glasses, the smell of cigars wafting through vents. Sometimes headlights would flare across her window after midnight, cars pulling up and leaving just as quickly. She didn't ask questions. She had learned long ago that silence could be a form of safety. Yet she wasn't the only one watching. On the fourth day, as she and Leonardo built a puzzle on the sitting room rug, she sensed him before she saw him. Adriano Vitale, standing in the doorway. His tie was loosened, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. He said nothing, just watched his son place the final piece and smile. A rare, fleeting thing. "Good," Adriano said quietly, almost to himself, then met Isabella's gaze. "He's calmer now." She nodded, unsure what to say. His presence filled the room like gravity, controlled, unreadable, but not cruel. He turned to leave, then paused. "Thank you, Miss Romano." When he was gone, she sat motionless for a long moment, her pulse uneven. The boy leaned against her, sleepy, safe. But Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere behind those marble walls, the house was holding its breath, watching, waiting. By the end of the first week, the rhythm of the villa began to change. The once hushed hallways carried softer sounds, music from the kitchen radio, the scrape of colored pencils on paper, and sometimes a faint laugh echoing through the East Wing. It startled the staff the first time they heard it. It had been nearly 2 years since Leonardo Vitale had laughed. Isabella discovered early that the boy's silence wasn't born of fear, but of absence, the kind that hollowed people from the inside. So she filled the silence with small things, stories whispered at bedtime, the smell of butter and flour in the kitchen, the warmth of her singing voice threading through the air. They baked together one afternoon, her apron tied around him like a cape, his small hands lost in a cloud of flour. "We'll make biscotti just like my nana used to," she told him, shaping dough into perfect little crescents. Leonardo nodded, his brow furrowed with focus. When he dropped one onto the floor, he looked up at her, wide-eyed, waiting for anger. Instead, she laughed, a light melodic sound that seemed to startle him. Then, shyly, he laughed too. The sound drew attention. Adriano appeared in the doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a faint shadow of surprise crossing his face. "I thought the kitchen had been taken over," he said. Isabella straightened, brushing flour from her hands. We were conducting culinary experiments. Leonardo darted behind her skirt, peeking out. Adriano's expression softened. I see. And who's winning? Leonardo hesitated, then held up a half-burned biscotto. Adriano chuckled, a low, genuine sound that seemed almost out of place coming from him. Then I suppose you are Piccolo, he said. That night, he joined them again, not in the kitchen, but in the sitting room. Isabella was reading from an old Italian storybook, her voice low and musical as Leonardo nestled against her side. Adriano lingered at the doorway, as he often did, until Isabella turned slightly and asked, "Would you like to sit?" For a moment, he looked almost uncertain, an emotion she never thought she'd see on his face. Then he crossed the room and sat opposite them, his gaze fixed on his son. As she read, Leonardo's small voice broke through the hush. Lupo, he whispered, pointing at the picture of a wolf. Isabella froze, the word hanging between them. Adriano's head snapped up. What did you say, figlio mio? Leonardo blinked, as if unsure. Then, softly, il lupo cattivo, the bad wolf. Isabella's heart swelled, her throat tightening. Adriano's eyes softened in a way that stripped away all traces of the fear dawn. He looked not like a man of power, but like a father hearing his child's voice for the first time. Bravo, he whispered. Bravo, Leonardo. The boy smiled, small, fragile, but real. Isabella looked at Adriano then, their eyes meeting across the room. Something electric passed between them. Not words, not gratitude. Something deeper. The air grew charged, a heartbeat longer than it should have been. Later, when the story ended and Leonardo drifted to sleep, Adriano stood by the doorway. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. You've done more in a week than doctors did in 2 years. I only listened, she said. He gave a faint smile. No, Signorina Romano. You cared. When he left, Isabella sat in the glow of the lamp, her heart caught between fear and warmth. She had promised herself to stay invisible, but in this house of shadows, she was beginning to bring light. Spring crept in quietly over the Hudson, softening the cold marble of the Vitale villa with sunlight and birdsong. Yet beneath the warmth, something colder stirred, an unease that Isabella couldn't name. It began with whispers. Voices carried through closed doors when she passed the study late at night. Words like shipment, territory, and Mancini murmured in low tones. The household, once peaceful, seemed taut now. Guards posted closer to the gates, unmarked cars idling in the driveway at odd hours. Isabella told herself it was none of her business. She wasn't part of that world. She was here for Leonardo. But even as she tucked him in a bed, she could feel the tension pressing against the villa's gilded walls like an unseen storm. One evening, she found Adriano in his office, sleeves rolled, phone to his ear. His voice, sharp and quiet, carried a different weight than the one she knew. No, he said in Italian. We move only when they move. I don't want blood on my doorstep again. He noticed her standing there and ended the call. For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, heavy and electric. You shouldn't be up, he said softly. I heard voices, she admitted. I thought something was wrong. His gaze softened, but only slightly. It's nothing you need to worry about. Adriano, she said carefully, you can't ask me to live here and pretend I don't see things. Men coming at midnight. Guards everywhere. Leonardo asking why the lights stay on all night. He leaned back against his desk, studying her. You see too much. Then tell me what I'm seeing. A pause. The faintest sigh. Business, he said finally. Old debts being repaid. Nothing that will touch you, or him. But she could see it in his eyes. Even he didn't fully believe that. That night, when she checked on Leonardo, Adriano stood by the boy's bed, watching him sleep. His usually unflinching posture sagged, just enough to reveal the man beneath the armor. He's all I have left, he murmured, not realizing she was there. Everything else can burn. The words reached her before he did. He turned, startled, when he saw her in the doorway. "You shouldn't," he stopped himself. The tension in his voice faded. "Do you ever regret coming here, Isabella?" She hesitated. "Sometimes," she admitted, "when I feel like I'm living in a house full of ghosts." He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Ghosts can't hurt you," he said. "Only the living can. And I don't intend to let them." The promise was quiet, but it carried something dangerous underneath it, something possessive, almost pleading. "I don't want Leonardo anywhere else," he added, his eyes locking onto hers. "And that includes you." Her breath caught. He turned away before she could answer, his outline fading into the shadowed hall. The house felt larger that night, louder in its silence. And for the first time since she arrived, Isabella wondered if safety and captivity could look the same. It began with silence, the kind that wakes you before the noise comes. Isabella opened her eyes to the faint hum of the security lights outside her window. The villa was unnaturally still. Then came the first sound, the sharp bark of a dog, followed by the echo of footsteps. Too many, too fast. She sat upright. Something inside her went cold. Across the hall, Leonardo whimpered in his sleep. Isabella slipped from her bed and hurried to his room just as the night shattered. A single gunshot cracked through the air, then another. The alarm screamed to life, red lights flashing down the corridor. "Mama!" Leonardo gasped, half awake, trembling. "No, no, Piccolo, it's me." She grabbed him, pulling him into her arms as glass exploded somewhere below. "Stay quiet." Voices rose, men shouting in Italian, the sharp staccato of automatic fire. Isabella crouched beside the bed, shielding the boy as dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard Adriano's voice, steady and commanding, a sound that cut through the panic. "Get them upstairs. Now!" A guard burst into the room seconds later, face pale. "Signorina, we must move now." Isabella clutched Leonardo tighter. "Where?" "Safe room, east corridor." "Go!" The hallway was smoke and noise, men running, the heavy scent of gunpowder filling the air. She stumbled after the guard, Leonardo clinging to her neck, his tears hot against her skin. Behind them, a window shattered, bullets tearing through the plaster. She screamed, but kept moving. Then, in the middle of the chaos, she saw him. Adriano. He stood at the end of the hall, firing into the darkness beyond the courtyard doors, his face illuminated by flashes of muzzle light. Gone was the poised man who spoke in measured tones. This was someone else, raw, brutal, terrifying. His voice thundered through the villa, every word in order. When he spotted them, something flickered across his face, fear. He shoved a gun into one of his men's hands. "Take them to the cellar," he barked. "No one touches them." Isabella was pulled away before she could speak. The guard forced her through a hidden doorway, down a narrow staircase that smelled of dust and iron. The gunfire above became distant thunder. In a small, dim panic room, Leonardo sobbed silently into her shoulder. She held him, whispering every prayer she knew until the noise finally died. Hours later, the door creaked open. Adriano stood there, his white shirt streaked with blood, eyes hollow from rage and exhaustion. "It's over," he said hoarsely. Outside, the garden was ruined, bullet holes in marble, smoke curling from the hedges, the metallic scent of death lingering in the air. 3 of his men lay covered beneath sheets. Isabella stared at the destruction, her hands shaking. "This is your world," she whispered. Adriano turned to her, jaw tight. "It's the world that keeps him alive." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw both the savior and the monster. Her protector and her prison. Something inside her cracked. That night, while the villa burned quietly against the dawn, Isabella packed her things. The sun hadn't yet risen when Isabella slipped out of the villa with Leonardo in her arms. The estate still smelled of smoke, the metallic sting of gunfire clinging to the cold air. She moved quickly, heart pounding, her small suitcase dragging behind her. None of the guards stopped her. They looked as hollow and broken as the house itself. By the time she reached the city, dawn had stained the skyline gray. Her friend Chiara's apartment in Queens was barely more than a single room above a deli, but it felt like sanctuary. Chiara's eyes widened when she opened the door. "Madonna mia, Isabella, what happened to you?" "Please," Isabella whispered, voice shaking. "No questions, just for a few days." Chiara nodded, pulling them inside. Leonardo clung to Isabella's coat, silent as ever, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. She settled them onto the small couch, brushing his curls back gently. "You're safe now, amore mio." Safe. The word felt fragile on her tongue. That night, as the city buzzed below the window, Isabella sat awake beside Leonardo, the glow of the street lamp cutting across her face. Every sound outside, a car backfiring, footsteps on the sidewalk, made her flinch. She could still hear the gunfire, still see Adriano's eyes in the chaos. Feral, desperate, and yet when he looked at her, filled with something like grief. He had killed to protect them, and in that realization lay the truth she didn't want to face. She loved him. Against reason, against fear, against every warning life had ever given her, she loved him. But love didn't make her safe. 2 days passed. The news was filled with whispers: Vitale retaliation, Mancini safe house bombed, rising body count. Each headline felt like another door closing. She switched off the television, afraid Leonardo might see it. "Can we go home?" he asked softly one evening, his small voice breaking the silence. Her heart clenched. It was the first time he had spoken since the attack. "Not yet," she said gently. "Not there." "But Papa." She pulled him close before he could finish, tears burning her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I know, Tesoro." That night, she packed her suitcase again. A one-way ticket to Chicago lay on the counter, bought with what little savings she had left. She would start over, find work, send for her family later. She told herself it was the only way to keep Leonardo safe. As she watched him sleep, curled beside her, the guilt pressed heavy on her chest. Adriano had promised protection, but his world only offered war. When dawn broke over Queens, she lifted her bag and took one last look out the window. Somewhere beyond the skyline, she imagined Adriano standing in his ruined garden, smoke curling around him like penance. "Goodbye," she whispered to the city. Then she took Leonardo's hand and stepped out into the cold morning, the sound of sirens fading behind her. The rain came down in relentless sheets, soaking the cracked pavement of the bus terminal and blurring the city lights into streaks of silver. Isabella stood beneath the flickering awning, her coat clinging to her, suitcase at her feet, Leonardo's small hand grasped tightly in hers. The next bus to Chicago was boarding in 5 minutes. She had told herself she wouldn't look back. Not at the city, not at the villa, not at the man whose world had swallowed her whole. Yet every heartbeat felt heavier the farther she drifted from him. Leonardo leaned against her side, silent and pale. His toy car, a gift from Adriano, was clutched in his hand. The sight of it made her chest ache. A horn blared. The driver called for passengers. Isabella bent down, her voice trembling. "Come on, Piccolo. It's time to go." He didn't move. And then, through the hiss of rain and the noise of engines, a voice cut through the storm. Low, familiar, unmistakable. "Isabella." She froze. Adriano Vitale stood at the edge of the terminal, rain dripping from his hair, his coat heavy and dark with water. There were no bodyguards, no black cars, no hint of the empire that followed him everywhere. Just a man, drenched, disheveled, desperate. He took a few steps forward, each one slower than the last. "You weren't supposed to go like this." She straightened, her throat tightening. "How did you find me?" He almost laughed, a sound too broken to be amusement. "I've spent years finding the enemies who wanted to kill me. Finding you is easier." The driver called again. Final boarding. Don't, Adriano said softly, stepping closer. Don't take him away from me. Her voice shook. You can protect him, Adriano, but you can't give him peace. You can't give him a life without fear. Rain ran down his face, mixing with something else, something that looked dangerously like regret. I can't lose you, Isabella. Not him. Not you. I've lost too much already. You're asking me to walk back into your world, she whispered. After what happened, after what I saw, I'm not asking you to live in my world, he said. I'm asking you to be the reason I change it. For a heartbeat, the noise of the terminal faded. All she could hear was the rain and the sound of her own breaking resolve. Then, from beside her, a small voice, soft but clear, rose above the downpour. Papa, please. Adriano froze. His head turned slowly toward Leonardo, disbelief flickering in his eyes. What did you say? Leonardo stepped forward, tears mingling with rain. Papa, don't cry. Something inside Isabella shattered. She dropped to her knees, pulling her son close, her sobs lost in the sound of the storm. Adriano knelt too, his hand trembling as it brushed Leonardo's cheek. I'm so sorry, he murmured. For everything. When Isabella looked up at him, she saw not the Don, but the father. The man. The one who had bled to protect them. The bus doors closed. It pulled away without them. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. Take us home. And for the first time, she didn't mean the house. She meant him. Months later, the Vitale estate no longer looked like a fortress. The broken windows were repaired, the gardens replanted, and laughter, real, unguarded laughter, floated through the open terrace doors. The war was over, or at least as close to over as men like Adriano Vitale could allow it to be. The Mancini syndicate had vanished from headlines, their empire quietly dismantled. And though whispers still followed his name, Illinois Leon di Sicilia had grown quieter, his roar reserved only for those who dared to threaten what remained of his world, his family. Isabella walked through the garden in the soft light of late afternoon. The roses, once wilted and blackened by smoke, had returned in shades of blush and ivory. Their scent mingled with the sea breeze drifting up from the cliffs below. From the veranda, she could hear Leonardo's laughter as Adriano tried, unsuccessfully, to teach him chess. The boy's voice was clear now, steady, curious, proof that he had found his voice again in a house once defined by silence. When she turned toward them, Adriano was already watching her. He wore no tie, no pretense of power, only a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled. The sight of him like that, a man stripped of armor, still caught her off guard. You've brought life back to this place, he said, crossing the garden. Isabella smiled faintly. It wasn't me. It was him, she said, glancing toward Leonardo. Adriano stopped in front of her, eyes softening. It was both of you. They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze rustling the petals around them. He reached into his pocket then, producing a small velvet box. Her heart stilled. I was going to wait, he said quietly, but waiting isn't something I've ever been good at. He opened the box. Inside rested a ring of gold and black onyx, its center engraved with the Vitale crest. It wasn't grand, just heavy, meaningful, enduring. You once told me this house was full of ghosts, Adriano said. Maybe it still is. But you've given them peace, Isabella. You've given me peace. I can't offer you a perfect world. Only my promise to protect you, to love you, for as long as I draw breath. The words were simple, but the gravity behind them silenced the air. Isabella's eyes shimmered. All her fear, her uncertainty, the long months of running and hiding, seemed to dissolve with the sound of his voice. Yes, she whispered. I don't need perfect. I just need this. Adriano slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand trembling slightly. The moment stretched between them, tender and certain. From the veranda, Leonardo clapped his small hands. Mama, he called, grinning. Papa is crying. Adriano laughed softly, brushing a tear from his cheek. "He's not wrong," he said. They stood there beneath the rose arch, sunlight spilling like gold through the leaves. Two souls who had clawed their way from ruin to something resembling peace. And though distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills, Isabella only smiled. She knew storms would always come, but this time they would face them together. And that's how a single act of kindness changed everything. Isabella Romano walked into Il Sereno that night as a waitress trying to survive, and walked out as the woman who would heal the heart of New York's most feared man. She didn't plan on love. She didn't plan on family. But sometimes fate doesn't ask for permission. It just waits for the right moment, the right word, the right heartbeat. Now, somewhere on a quiet Sicilian hillside, laughter echoes through a home once haunted by ghosts. A boy who once couldn't speak tells stories at dinner. And the man once called Il Leone di Sicilia finally understands that strength isn't built on fear. It's built on love. Because in the end, it wasn't the empire Adriano Vitale built that defined him. It was the family that rebuilt him. If you love this story, then drop a comment below. Would you have stayed for love or walked away for safety? Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to keep the stories coming, where passion meets power, and every whisper could change a life. Until next time, born in the shadows, told with heart. See you in the next video.